I made that change.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we're recording, and I wish I had thought of that by yourself a lot earlier.
Could
So
you
thank you
restate what you had just said, David, by any chance? And like conjure up those excellent words again.
Oh,
It was an
well,
interesting exercise.
flattery will not help my memory, sadly. So actually, let me do the quick summary. We are reviewing this TAC text proposal, which is, I think, has a lot going for it. We had a couple quick comments. One of them was that we need to make it clear that creating a new project involves approval by the working group if it's within the working group, and then acceptance by the TAC. The next comment, I think that, I can't remember who, I think it was Bob, was we need to make it clear why something was within a working group rather than its own thing. What I proposed is building on what seems to have kind of happened in practice anyway. Projects usually are created within working groups. That enables us to have various related projects work together and try to reduce some unnecessary duplication. The projects that tend to be right underneath the TAC tend to be large projects, tend to have, their own funding line, and in fact, often have like their own governing boards and so on. Basically, that has to be pretty large for it to justify it being under the TAC. Nobody else needs to agree with me, but that was my my pitch for how to think of that.
So I'll add a different perspective of context here to say that I think what David described is a good ideal state, certainly what I know some folks would like to see, but for historical reasons, among other reasons, some projects aren't in that state today and might not go towards that state quickly, maybe over time. But I don't think it's a priority to try and move projects into a working group necessarily, though some might want to. And there's a division in the documentation that I would love to see, which is a description of here's our intent, our desired structure, and here's the reality that we have some projects that are working a little differently right now.
I think Steve is next.
Just on that, because Sahinder and I don't have the history of the existing structure, if somebody could help us out with that, that would be a big help.
Yep.
And the second thing I was thinking of, I think we do need to, instead of having generic project that's under a working group, and then we have the larger project that David was talking about, I think for clarification, we should give those separate names of some sort.
I have a diagram of the OpenSSF org chart if you would like me to share that briefly.
I would love to see that. Org as in the people or org as in the projects? Org chart can mean multiple things.
Yeah, fair enough. How's this? Maybe I'm not sure how to answer that. Why don't I just quickly share my screen and then you can laugh at my attempt. So let me just share the screen and others can see it. There it is.
Oh, great.
Now, like all models, it necessarily omits things. The security tooling working group actually has a subgroup on fuzzing that's not being shown. Of course, there's lots of different projects within the working groups, but this at least gives an idea.
Jump in. Arnaud, could you mute when you're not speaking? We're picking up background noise from you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this doesn't show the subgroup for fuzzing inside the security tooling working group. It doesn't show the projects, but at least it gives you an idea of how this is organized today.
I would love to see this reflected in a mermaid diagram in the repo as well. And as part of the, then ongoing habit we would all have to update that whenever things do change.
Yeah, I actually
very
copied this.
helpful.
Thank you. I copied this into the OpenSSF membership slides. So people who show up and are interested in new members are going to suddenly see this thing. But I do agree that maybe this or something like this would be a good thing within the
Yeah.
OpenSSF.
Long term,
site.
I've seen plenty of other organizations, including Kubernetes and OpenStack, embed their organizational structure like this in human readable and machine readable files so that they can both render a diagram like this for the community guide or landing page and have the updates to it tracked in a commit history.
Having just created this slide 2 days ago, I haven't worked that far ahead.
Right. No, this is a great start. And David, you're the best person on the call to have
But-
that view right now.
So, however, I mean, the committees are not really relevant to what we're trying to do here, right?
No, that's right. That's right. I
Mhm.
just,
But it
somebody
is-
asked, what's the structure? I have a slide.
Yeah, no, I understand.
At a higher level, right, the committees don't report to the TAC. And so we're focused in the TAC repo on modeling everything under the TAC.
Right.
I would still love to see that list of committees somewhere in the OpenSSF GitHub and governance documentation that this is the overall picture of the org. I think that's very helpful for folks. And I know Kubernetes has the same thing. For them, it's in the community repo. So maybe this is a good and quick segue, since I guess a couple of weeks ago, Jory and I had created a /OpenSSF/community repo. And my thinking there was based on how other foundations structure these different repos, that the TAC repo focuses on TAC process. So project review, project lifecycle, that sort of stuff that a lot of this is, and the overall community structure gets copied into or moved into the community repo. And that's sort of the entry point for new members of the community. Send them to the community page. If they want to come work in the TAC, send the TAC page. Do folks think that's a good idea in terms of how we might approach splitting up the content?
Yeah, I've seen that before. So, and it does help navigate things a little bit easier.
Yeah, I do think for this particular thing, if it's going to be shared, it might even be useful to post it on the website itself and then make sure that that's generated for, there's a GitHub repo, it generates it, and then you can see the figure for an org chart. So haven't thought that far ahead. That's got to be something somebody solved before.
Okay, Steve, you're next.
Just want to kind of bring this back to the document that Sahinder and I have been working on, just to help move that along. Do we need to, like I said, give a different name to the project that's underneath the working group versus a large, like SigStore would be, SigStore is a bad example because it's a SIF, but something like that.
To be honest, all of the top level projects are also called special initiative funds. They're all like this. They're they have their own budget item. They often have their own internal structure.
So Persia, if it were to join the OpenSSF as a sandbox project, it would be considered a SIF then?
I don't think.
I don't think so.
I don't think
So
it has to be. I mean, I think it's either way is perfectly plausible.
All the discussions I've had around SIF so far have much more to do with financial management of the projects, not technical management or project internal structure. So I have not yet seen a proposal from Persia that it would have its own special interest fund.
That's what I'm getting at,
else.
because Persia wouldn't be falling into the SIF as it would be a top level, I wouldn't say top level, it'd be a project outside of a working group that is not a SIF. How do we
Right.
classify that?
Excellent questions. Yes.
So I also heard David say there are working groups with subgroups, because that's not something we have on the diagram right now. So
It's not.
No,
And-
it's
and-
not.
So,
if that's
so
the reality, maybe we need to capture that.
a lot of what we're uncovering right now, and this is exactly what I was hoping we'd get to do, is the reality today is everything's kind of chaotic and we need to put more structure in place. And so writing down simultaneously, here's what we want to see, and here's where we are. Let's just chart a course between the two. And that's the struggle we're facing as a TAC right now, is not knowing where we're starting from and where we're going. I know as I joined the TAC, I didn't have a clear picture of what's on the screen right now.
I understand. I think it's a big club, but but so the question to me is, I mean, is the intent to capture what's being done today as much as possible without changing it? And I mean, my assumption is, unless we have a good reason to say, no, this is broken, we need to change it, we're just going to try to basically define what we have.
Oops.
I see several hands up. I'll answer really quickly for myself. My intent is to describe what we have, but design something better and use that to navigate our way there. But I didn't see that order of hands.
All right, so Bob is next, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think documenting what we have is just a prereq to being able to articulate where we're going. So +1 to what Ava said. I still think the questions around what do we want the ultimate design to look like? What are the gives and gets? And answering the question around like, why should Persia become a top level project versus be underneath a working group? What would actually be more beneficial to help to nurture the success of that community? And is there an implication in terms of financial support or marketing support that reporting direct to the TAC? Like it's that, if Steve, you were to ask me the question of like, can the TAC recommend what the ideal process is? This is what we want to see our project and our community become. Right now, I'm like, I got nothing to tell you because it's like, there's no strategy, there's no vision. So to me, we can play around with org charts and dotted lines and things like that, but at the end of the day, it still kind of comes back to how do we most effectively, like, what are the goals we want to set for projects? How will this structure help to facilitate allowing working groups and projects to achieve those goals? And that's the part that I'm not clear on at all.
I'm gonna jump in here real quick because I gotta leave in a few minutes. I would say that if we just keep in the back of our mind that this is an evolving process, and that maybe 2 weeks from now we have a whole different direction than we do today, that we just kind of take it one step at a time and try to march closer to something that can be used like by Persia to get into the OpenSSF.
Right.
Yeah, totally agree. Like, last thing I want to say there on that is like, I'm not saying that in the context of like, want to keep stalling this conversation for you guys. Like that's not my intent at all. But to be clear, like, I don't know how to set you up for success. Like that's going to be the biggest question, because other than just saying like you want the OpenSSF logo next to your project in a state of incubated right now, like I don't even know what that means and how that actually helps you. So it's not that I'm going to come into that with a no, I won't approve it because I don't understand it. It's just, if we can't have this constructive dialogue around what should it be, then all we're doing is kicking the can down the road for the next project. So I agree with you. Like we got to iterate and move and not stall, but these sort of fundamental questions around like, what does this ultimately mean? What guidance would we give to the next project that comes forward after Persia? Like, if we don't start making progress on these questions now, all we're doing is just kicking the can down the road. And that's not productive in my view.
Yeah. Nor is it fair to projects like Persia. We're
totally agree.
Part of the struggle has been these aren't set up, so let's get that fixed, which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right, Jory's
not my
next.
turn.
Yeah, well, so Bob just said, so much of what I would have said. So let me, instead of repeating Bob, suggest that one of the things that we can do is start to itemize, like, here are the things that the foundation is providing for the working groups and for the work streams, I'll call them, underneath the working groups, so that we can start to paint a little bit of that picture, what the gives are, I suppose, to the projects. Would that be helpful as part of this exercise?
I think so. When you said work stream, did you mean to refer to projects in general, or or the kind of subgroups that David was talking
This-
about
the
earlier,
sub-
which we have not captured.
Subgroups.
The subgroups, you know,
Well,
because
I'm just trying to make sure I know what you're talking about.
I have one more layer to add. In the current draft of this, projects and working groups both follow the same stages. But what does it mean to have a project at a different stage than the working group it's nested under?
Actually,
So
I don't have any trouble with that. Sorry.
Okay,
Fred.
David, you're next. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to plus one on Bob. Bob's basically structure should support the goal, not the other way around. I suspect none of us have heard about Chesterton's fence. Don't change something until you understand why it is the way it is. That doesn't mean that we can't change it or shouldn't change it. I think there are things that need changing, but it's always good to know why it was, why something was done the way it was first, because to get back to the let's make a structure so that we get the jobs done. Yeah, as far as the sub working groups and so on, if that helps, sure, whatever. But as long as we get to solving the problems, that's what we really need to go. And to answer the particular point about what does it mean that a project has a higher level than the working, you know what? I don't see any trouble with that at all. Maybe the larger group is struggling to organize some things, but a particularly narrowly focused project, they've managed to get all things running.
Here's what I mean, or what I see the complexity there, David. As we start defining what are the gives and gets, what benefits any body receives from marketing or infrastructure support or LF staff support, if the project nested under a working group is expecting to get a level of support that their host working group is not going to receive, that's going to create awkwardness in management and possibly some real challenges organizationally. I would like to
hear you, but I don't know that that's going to be the case. Just looking at the list of what do you get? I mean, it seems to me the graduation projects or graduation criteria are more about, are you able to do certain things? And
so I have to interject, guys, because I'm sorry. I have to interject because the point I wanted to bring up has to do with the project lifecycle versus the working group lifecycle. I actually don't think they should be the same.
That's exactly where I was going, Arnaud.
Okay.
Yep, exactly where I was going.
So, and for that matter, we have already a working group lifecycle. I put the URL in the chat.
We do.
And it's very simple, but I think it actually does the job.
And
okay, so
CNCF and Kubernetes also have separate lifecycle and separate criteria for them, though they don't nest projects under working groups for quite this reason, right? A working group might support one or many projects, but doesn't own it. The TAC still owns that oversight and that relationship. And ultimately, the graduation review or the level review of a project is a TAC responsibility, not a working group responsibility. And it has budgetary ramifications for the organization. Within the CNCF, when a project reaches certain maturity levels, it is granted time and space at a conference. So staff and facilities requirements and budget. It is granted CI infrastructure spend to support that project's testing. That incubating projects or sandbox projects don't get that. So there are real costs associated with moving a project up those levels that are not the same when a working group moves up those levels.
I agree. And for that matter, we have similar structure in Hyperledger. I mean, and there's one thing we haven't really talked about is what is fundamentally the difference between a working group and a project? To me, a project is about code. It's some kind of code development effort, while a working group is not directly. It might be indirectly through some projects, but the working group might be doing documentation, like we have like the vulnerability disclosure guide, for instance, which is great. And that's done by a working group, makes perfect sense to me. That's where I see the difference. And maybe others see it differently, but that's how I see it. So wait, we have people on the queue. David, are you still in the queue?
I just
Or did you
added myself
forget to
back in.
lower? Okay, so Bob, I think is next.
Yeah, I think the other point I would make is that it starts to go back towards the special interest fund thing, but I want to call it out in that with scorecards, with SigStore, we are actually offering community-run services as part of these projects. That, in some sense, you could think of them as extensions of things like CI and whatnot, but they're actually public-hosted things that actually run today with, you know, effectively no SLA, right? But in terms of when we think about the gives and gets of what is underneath the OpenSSF banner, one of the major motivations for SigStore to come in under the model of an SIF was we knew we were going to have operational costs that were associated with that. And so that led us down more of the financial path. But I think it's like, in some cases, we're going to have projects that are just pure code, take with it and run it wherever you want. We may have services that we need to run as common infrastructure for the betterment of the broader set of the community, or we have any derivation there in between. So I guess when I think about project, to your point, like I think code too, but I could also think of there may be outputs of that project that are actual operational services that need infrastructure, SRE, et cetera, that go along with it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Sadindra is next.
Yeah, I had just a question around the way, Ava, you referred to TAC and working group and funds. So I noticed that in CNCF, it is referred to as TAC, Technical Oversight Committee, while at OpenSSF, it is referred to as Technical Advisory Committee. And when I read those words, I imagined that in OpenSSF, it would be more loosely administered, or there'll be more looser process around how projects find the resources that they need to succeed versus, and I heard some, you know, side conversations about oversight versus advisory. So am I understanding it correctly when we refer to technical advisory in OpenSSF, where the TAC actually helps projects in areas that they might be struggling instead of having a deeper oversight on them?
On the one hand, I think we're still feeling our way through that. To you know, comments others have made so far, this is all evolving, and we are collectively right now helping to evolve that. Historically, I think your understanding is correct, that it was a pretty loosely run projects show up and do some stuff. And that has resulted in a lot of the struggles and challenges that, you know, the Persia team is currently facing, and only the latest in a line of projects that have run into the same question of what exactly do we get and how is this governed and where do we go when we have questions? To be able to answer that and help the organization become stable and sustainable and predictable to work with for projects or companies that want to contribute projects. We're trying to see if that has to change a little bit. I think I saw David and then Bob.
Yeah, so let me put a -1 on the notice, on the statement that a project is something that generates code. That isn't how we've been doing things, and more importantly, I don't think it should be. Um, I can't count and listen to everybody at the same time, but I just pulled up a slide of all the projects that are going on with it in the OpenSSF. Maybe I should share this thing too. Share screen. All right, so you can see what I'm looking at. So this is a slide that attempts to list for each of the working groups a for all the projects within them. There may be a few things that's missing here, but I think around half, and I suspect more than half, are not code projects. So we've got, and it's because of the kind of foundation the OpenSSF is. So many of the things aren't code, but they're documents and specs and guidelines and courses and things like that. So I don't think we should limit projects to only being code projects.
So I would like to propose that we do, if we have to use a different word to describe the other things and go do a little bit of cleanup. Part of the reason I would propose that and subject to change, my mind can be changed on this. Compatibility and sort of ease of folks working across foundations, right? Folks who are used to working in a bunch of other Linux Foundation environments will see a GitHub repo and a thing called a project and assume there's code that is part of the deliverables. Maybe it's a library, maybe it's samples, maybe it's tests or something, but it's still, there's a code deliverable that a project owns. And projects also own documentation.
Yeah, except for CNCF, I haven't seen that as a common convention, actually.
It's also in the CCC and are not, if I'm not mistaken, it's also true in Hyperledger. And it's also true in...
What do you call the work efforts to write specs?
Working groups or special interest groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if something like Salsa, or where there is a goal to produce a set of documentation and guidelines to be broadly consumed, in the CNCF terms, that would be a working group. And it's time bounded. They're chartered to spend X amount of time to make this publication, and then quite likely extend it because it's not over. You don't just publish once. But they have a clear goal. And the goal isn't make code, it's do this study, publish this thing, perform a security audit, something like that. Yeah. And it's just a logical distinction between what owns code and what groups are delivering a non-code valuable output.
I don't think they have to be time bounded, but it's true that it often is the case. But I wouldn't throw that in that mix because I think that's a different dimension, which is kind of, optional. But
in the original Kubernetes formulation, they were. SIGs were.
No,
and we don't have to copy that, but contextually.
In Hyperledger, they were initially, and then we removed it. So, it's like.
Yeah, I think the time bounding doesn't make sense because for most of this stuff, as soon as you release something, you're going to have a new release. That's true for code. It's also true for docs.
Yep, that's true. So I'm not attached to the time boundedness of it, but I do think it's valuable to have a moniker that distinguishes between operational services and a group that owns the operational service, a project or a body that is delivering primarily code of some form, and a body that is delivering non-code things like documentation, guidance, security audits, stuff like that. I think those are three useful distinctions from a governance perspective because they also have different requirements from the foundation and the kind of support they receive.
I'm not convinced that we need another term, but that's just a word thing. We the trick will be finding another word because non-code is a weird phrase. Sorry,
working group.
The working group works.
No, we already have working groups. That's probably not going to help.
I am not sure about that. I think working groups can map to what we have today, but
then we'll have working groups with mostly working groups within them. Since, as I said, I believe the majority of what we currently call projects are actually non-code.
Is that list somewhere I could easily see?
I guess that's a question for both the slides you shared, David. Are they public somewhere or published? Somewhere?
Let's see here. Let's see, who is that shared to? Anyone with the link? I don't see any reason. You know what? I guess I don't. You're in the TAC. I'm going to send that to you. I assume it's fine, but I'm going to send the link to you directly, and I'll double check with Brian. I don't see why. There's nothing particularly secretive about this. We share it to anybody who's thinking about possibly joining the OpenSSF. It's the standard. Hey, you're thinking about joining the OpenSSF, but you want to know more. Here's the deck.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we're all part
Jory,
of a member
do you know anything
company
about shareability of that?
The membership overview deck.
Yeah.
That should be a public document. My question is if it's in. Let me double check before you do send that.
It is accessible publicly. I checked the
Okay.
share.
Okay.
Anybody with the link can see it, but I don't know if there was,
Yeah.
I just hate sharing somebody else's deck without asking them.
If it's as in Hyperledger, that kind of document is definitely public. So
Right. Usually this would be, I just, as I said, it's more a matter of, I don't want to share somebody else's thing without.
I understand.
I would expect this to be public as I'm skimming it.
Yeah,
The only question would be, it has the cost structure for membership, but that should also be public as I understand it.
I believe that's all public too. Yeah.
Then
I
nothing.
hope it doesn't change from one person to the next.
Right?
But only for you. No, it does not.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Jay has his hand up.
Thanks. All right, so somebody who's brand new, right? Brand spanking new. I'm talking about like newborn
You're
baby
welcome.
still in diapers, trying to figure this whole thing out. What I saw earlier were a couple of diagrams I thought were pretty good. Put me in the ballpark until we started asking questions. So I'm about to ask a couple of really, pretty basic questions. And please, if it's somewhere that I haven't looked yet, and say, no, look over here, it's right here, so I can get caught up, tell me it's right there somewhere. Where are the definitions of what a working group is per OpenSSF?
We're trying to define that right now.
You're in the right meeting. We're
Okay,
working
so
that
We
out
don't have
right
it
now.
yet. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so this is where I'm at right now, right? We're in the donuts. We have called ourselves donut makers, right? We're Dunkin' Donuts, and we're here, and we're trying to decide whether we've got coffee, right? We got hazelnut coffee, we got all kinds of coffee. We're saying, hey, we want something that we can dunk in this coffee. And we're now, somebody's in the back room now making donuts, right? They're making circular donuts. And somebody says, but wait a minute, do we want donuts while somebody's making the donuts? Do we want bear claws?
I want an eclair.
Or do we want the right? Do we want the clear, right? And somebody says, oh crap, okay, let's go back. So now they're making a chocolate frosted covered bear claw for the coffee. And somebody says, well, who wants a chocolate covered bear? What if we want a donut with sprinkles? That's a lot. Like I said, I'm brand spanking new. To me, it's a lot.
So Jay,
Come on,
we've
Eva.
often
Nobody gets an eclair for breakfast, okay? Croissant if you want.
Croissant, thank you.
Yeah,
You have to respect some rules.
Speak for yourself.
Jay, you've made us
I'm
all
French.
want-
I have some standards,
So I've had my first ever gluten-free croissant in New York, in DC a couple of weeks ago. It's amazing. I haven't had a croissant in almost a decade. But Jay, you've made us all hungry now. Thank you for that.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to the end of this meeting so I can go get some food, maybe a bear claw.
Because I'm hungry myself right now. I have to bring it back to the donuts. I'm hungry myself right now.
But I want to reserve the last couple of minutes to wrap something up in the conversation. But to your point, Jay, I think a bunch of us have used the analogy of we're building a ship while we're sailing, and we're trying not to sink in the process, right? There are leaks, but also the sail isn't working, and we've got some timber sitting around. So we're trying to patch things while also make the ship more efficient at the same time. And it is a messy process. A couple of us have lived through these trenches before. The CCC went through a very similar phase where we had, several projects joined right at the beginning, but we hadn't figured out what the projects actually got from their membership, or from their being in the foundation of the companies from their membership. And so we're defining that right now, and it is messy. And hopefully we don't end up with what's a cronut, Jory?
A donut and a cronut. They made them in New York, and everybody went ape over it. And then somebody trademarked it, and there was a lawsuit. And anyway, it's just funny.
Hopefully we don't end up with a cronut. That's a great one.
What we can't do is build the boat while it's in the water. You got to build it first and then bring it to the water and test it.
I love that, but we're in the water. We're already in the water. We are 2 years and $10 million in the water, and we're sailing, and we're not near shore anymore. So we're building it.
And I think that's the difference with other efforts similar, I've been involved in before, like Hyperledger. We had this effort going on at the same time we were growing the organization, while here it had actually been going on for a while. And now we're saying, oh, wait, what are the rules here? And yeah, I agree with Eva. We can't afford to just say, stop everything. Let's, clean up the boat and then start again. That's not an option. So we have to figure it out as we go.
We're about 4 years into this. Chris Robb, or he's not on this call, but Krob can give anybody a much longer backstory on those 4 years. And some of the reason why the boat launched before it was in an ideal state is the executive order a couple of years ago that said, we all need to go solve some supply chain security. And all the companies got together and started to solve it. It's like, great, we got to put this and this and this and this in the batter. That's how we make batter, right? And we started making donuts before realizing, maybe we used the wrong kind of milk. We're supposed to use whole milk, not 2% or something. And now we're trying to fix the batter a little bit. I'm totally mixing my metaphors here.
So fail fast, right? I mean, so if we were to say fail forward, there you go. If we were to say what's a working group then? What's a working group?
We have a definition of that today. It's on the website or the GitHub.
All right. And then a project. What's a project?
We don't have a definition of that today, but we have a bunch of projects and we're working that out.
Yeah. I mean, today there are specific focused actions to generate code or documents or service or documents or services or specifications. And Ava's suggesting that we call them different things, and that's okay. By the way, in the charter, working groups and projects are together called initiatives.
Initiatives.
Okay, but the word initiative is combined to cover either working groups or projects, but again with the notion that projects are often documentation projects. So,
yep.
I mean, we can change terms, just
But we can't change the charter easily. So
no.
I would, and if anyone looks at the OSF/community repo in my PR there, I did use that set of terms. I said technical initiative, which is how it's phrased in the charter, and I nested projects and working groups under technical initiative. And I think we can reflect that in the docs here as well. Last couple of minutes, I'd like to ask everyone to sort of pause, take a step back. I know, Sujindra, you're out next week. If you can open that, if you can move your PR onto the branch, Bob or I can merge it right away. And then what I'd like to, awesome. We've all just had a great, 2 days of talking about a lot of ideas and how to refine the documentation. Let's continue using the Slack channel. And I'd say, this is what I'd like to propose. Everybody here, go take a crack at it. Try to capture these ideas in PRs against that branch and ping Bob or I or anybody else who can, maybe David can, to merge those so that we can iterate rapidly against each other's PRs, not have a PR sitting there for a week and duplicating efforts. But the faster we can merge them, the faster we can iterate as a group. So don't wait for reviews. Don't wait for a big dialogue unless there's something really wrong and you don't want to merge it. It's like, oh, that looks like a useful conversation. Grab it, merge it. Do folks feel like that's a reasonable approach at this time?
Yeah, I agree.
Question, Ava, on the points Bob was asking about, sort of like the benefits to working groups and projects. As David pointed out, we don't have that like published clearly somewhere, but obviously there's a list of things that we do. Where would you like to see that sort of thing live? Because I'm not sure it belongs in this PR, but maybe it does. I don't know.
I still think the organizational structure I'd like to see us reach in terms of the documents here, the repos, is the community repo describes all of that stuff that you were just asking about, Jory, of like, what do projects get? What do working groups get from the foundation or from the staff? How do they work together? And the TAC repo focuses much more on the TAC's actual process. What does the TAC do? how does the TAC evaluate things? What's the cadence we expect from projects? What's the list of projects technical initiatives under the TAC? And so I'd like to see us divide them, but I don't want to slow down our current work. If we have to, move some files between repos later, I'm okay with that.
I posted in the chat, but it's about to go away. I think one advantage of being part of a working group is that you can interact with interested parties to discuss directions. And of course, the OpenSSF governing board can choose to provide funding, and I think that's easier to justify for something that's within the OpenSSF. As far as what does the TAC provide, I think at least, it fundamentally oversight things like, oh, wait a minute, this project and that project, they're starting to overlap. There's some issues, trying to work out things so that we all work in the same general direction. I'm sure there's more that are escaping my mind, but there's at least, I think, some of the arguments of why.
Yeah, having a description of the benefits and the expectations.
Yes, absolutely.
Really important to write that down.
Yeah.
And for what you have in the PowerPoint, to move it out of that PowerPoint and into one of the 2 GitHub repos, it's also really important. So Joy, since you have a sense of that, you want to do it, go for it.
Yeah, so it's maybe going to suggest so that it doesn't, because to your point, we can just copy that over. Maybe we put, I can open a PR with that in the community repo for now. And,
Works for me. Yes, I will merge that.
Jay, you still have your hand up, or are you done?
Oh no, I forgot to lower it.
That's all right. So before we go, I wanted to add something because I've been trying to challenge my expectation with regard to the projects versus working groups. And I think there is one reason we need to have different types of group, for whether this is about code or some documentation effort, is because there are certain things that are very specific to coding projects, like, security audits. I don't think you're going to have a security audit if all you're doing is developing some documentation or some specification. And so I think the life cycle and the criteria to move in the different stage, are going to be different depending on the nature of the work at hand, whether it's developing documentations or code. Go ahead, Sunindra. We have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I had just a comment on what Jody is going to add. So my only request is I can't keep in my head whether process and community are connected or somehow. Can we surface it into the process documentation as well, even though if you add the gets and gives inside the community area, so that when I have questions like, Jay, what does it mean? I have one place to go look at it and understand, what I get by becoming a project or a working group.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm not sure exactly where that linkage should happen in the process documentation, but I would assume that at some point there's a reference to it wherever it will live canonically. So yeah, +1 to that suggestion.
Merge
One other
the
quick
PR.
ask. Awesome. Thanks, David.
Go ahead, Bob.
One other question maybe for the Persia, and I don't mean this in any sort of like trying to force things through, but I'm just trying to think of how we make sure that we're building a system that's useful and that we're also not blocking that conversation. Is there maybe just an ask, if you could spend a few moments to think about what you would like to ask from the OpenSSF more broadly in terms of coming to join and being officially blessed as a project at whatever level in whatever hierarchy, what would we be able to offer to help support you? And then use that as an example to apply to this, to say, hey, are we actually answering the right questions? Because if we build a perfect process and you come in with 6 different questions that we don't have the ability to answer, then all we've done is forced you down the road even further, and I don't want that to happen. So again, just an ask. I think it would be useful for if you and Steve and others could maybe just spend a few minutes thinking about that. That would be super helpful for me to help to grok all of this.
Yeah, we are trying to create a case and write down concrete asks and where the direction is. So we'll bring that. Thank you, and we are working on it.
Great, thanks.
I just dropped a link in here in case folks hadn't seen it. Within the Confidential Computing Consortium, we put a bunch of work to define those gives and gets in this document. Right? There's lists of expectations that are bidirectional, like what can projects expect to get in return? So,
if I may, before we go, I'm not entirely sure I understand the intended process from here on. We're all going to review something and make comments on it, but I want to know where the it is.
I was not proposing comments. I was proposing PRs.
PRs, that's fine.
On that branch.
Which branch?
The one that Bob
91.
just created. So 91 is a PR, not a branch. I will drop a link.
Yeah, drop the link, because what I'm going to do is
I'm
going to, there we go, right there. It's the TAC tree working version process that Bob
Working version
posted.
process branch. Yes.
Yeah, that's where we move the PR. Yeah.
My proposal is that we all go open PRs against that branch and merge them rapidly, right? Rather than having a long review process, which makes it very hard for multiple people to make parallel changes. We need to be able to stack our changes on top of each other in some of these files. So if, for example, if Jory opened a PR about some of the, what do projects get back from the foundation? And if David, you open one with a list of projects, Bob and I might just go see both those PRs without discussion, just merge them. And then maybe Arnaud comes in 2 hours later and sees they're both in there and builds his change on top of both. Does that make sense as a process?
Yes, but that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted the where to start from and make pull requests on that.
Got it.
Excellent. I probably won't do it today because I'm rushing on updating the course. I've got a deadline, but I'm definitely interested in getting this resolved.
My hope for this,
has been waiting a long time.
I know. My hope for this is that we're able to iterate on this branch. And by mid next week, we have enough progress. We can send a note to the whole TAC saying, hey, here's our set of changes. Please review them.
Okay.
Thank you all for a lovely discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. We'll get this up on the YouTubes shortly as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.